Morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be, to another episode of The Tool Shed. And the purpose of the Tool Shed podcast is to get conversations happening from all areas of the building industry. There are what we've discovered in an attempt to help builders, because that was where we kind of started with all of this. We created the Tool Shed app, where there's a whole lot of resources for anybody and everybody in the building industry. But this podcast is specifically designed to get conversations going so different areas of the building industry can start to understand what's going on in other areas of the building industry. Because one of the things that we've found out, particularly when we started working in the mental health space, is conversations are really important, and understanding what's going on in different parts of the building industry can help everybody. So a little excited today to speak to a gentleman by the name of Martin Katak. And Martin is in the area of finance, and if there is an area that causes distress and angst and frustration when running a business, maintaining a business, is the area of finance. And I don't think that there's any bigger stress in any business when it comes down to it than money stress. And the challenge with money stress is that it amplifies the consequences of every other problem that you might have in business and in life. So it's I'm a bit excited to be able to speak to Martin today about that area of finance and what happens when the banks say no. Fundamentally, that's going to be something that we're going to be talking about. So welcome to the Tool Shed, Martin. Let's get started by finding out a little bit about your background and how you got started in this area. So welcome. Tell us.
Okay, thanks, Mick. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. My background is reasonably diverse. I come from the hospitality industry originally, and so I was brought up in a hotel. So one of my claims to fame is I started working in a public bar when I was 14 years of age. So because you were able to do that back then, and it's not something you see these days, but it's a very good way to learn a lot about people and human behaviour.
Yeah.
And as a young guy, I heard many stories and a yarn told by many
Well, I'm
people drinking
hoping that
beers
we'll
at the
hear
bar.
some of those stories as we go along, because I think some of those are going to be a bit interesting. So tell us a little bit about the business that you're currently in, the name of it, and what its focus is.
Okay, well, the business I run is called Finance for Business, and I'm a working capital specialist. So really, if you want someone to refinance your house, you want someone to finance your new ute, I'm not the guy to talk to. That's not what I do. I specialize in helping businesses having the working capital they need, and that's basically the readies to deal with managing their cash flows, taking on new projects, uh, paying their suppliers, and getting paid themselves. So I sort of work in that, what we call the working capital space, and that's the area where I mainly concentrate.
Yeah. And so there's got to be a reason for your existence. Like the reason for our existence is that carpenters think that they can start a building business because they're good at building. Turns out not to be the case. That you need to know a little bit about business and people management, and be a psychologist and a babysitter and an accountant and a juggler and a marketer and. So what are some of the issues that you're finding, particularly in the building and construction industry, that come along because people don't have the right sort of financial model in place and aren't capitalised, I guess, to be able to function and then maybe grow?
Yeah, look, I suppose the reason for my existence is that I've noticed all small businesses, but particularly in the construction area, because the barriers to entry in starting up a construction business aren't that high. You can sort of start work as a subby and start doing it yourselves. They don't really have sufficient capital to start the business. So they spend lots of time losing sleep and worrying about a thing called cash flow.
Mm.
And cash flow isn't necessarily the most important thing. Cash flow is becomes crucial because you don't have enough cash.
Yeah.
And I try and work in the area of making sure they do have enough cash so that waiting for that next payment so I can pick up the wage bill this week is not the thing that makes them lose sleep at night.
Yeah. So I agree. Cash flow isn't the main thing. I guess at the end of the day, people start their own business, so they end up with more money for themselves than they would being employed by somebody else. So profitability is really one of the most important things, but also time, freedom, and so forth. What are some of the mistakes that you tend to see businesses in the construction industry make that causes the need for someone like yourself to step in and help out?
Look, one of the problems, there are a couple of things. One of the first ones that sticks out to me, and I see this in smaller businesses, and this applies to builders and all the subcontractors that run off them. Um, it tends to be a little bit of a matey network. In other words, oh, look, Jack owes us 50 grand. I know he hasn't paid us for 60 days, but he's okay. He's a good bloke. He'll be right. It'll come through at the end of the day.
Famous last
Uh,
words.
they are. And as you know, that's not the way things happen. And so in normal businesses, we have different areas. And, if you're a small business doing something else, you'd have your sales department and you'd have your accounts department. And your salespeople will be busy running out there selling all they can, which is what a small business guy tends to do. But he doesn't have an accounts department that pulls up and says, I've had to ring Jack 3 times and he keeps promising he'll send me a check and I haven't been paid. So we tend to have a conflict of interest when we're the business principal, who's generally the champion salesperson looking for more work and picking it up, and not looking at the back end of the business to make sure that we necessarily get paid.
Mm.
So this is something I talk to people about a lot, of how they manage that process. But what happens is that as your business grows, more people owe you money. So this is the problem. So, for example, working capital is the difference between what you owe people and what you're owed, in
Mm.
simple terms, to keep it
Yeah.
simple. So if our business, in let's say 1 month, our business is in a year we've got a $1.2 million turnover, because that's an easy number to work with, which means we have sales or we have turnover 100,000 a month. Now, if I've got sales of $100,000 a month, I'm going to be owed roughly $200,000 at any time, because people pay me 45 days from end of month or
Yeah.
30 days or whatever those terms are. It means if my turnover is 100, people are going to owe me 200. So, and I am going to owe, and generally the ratio is for my raw materials, whatever I use in my business, I'm going to owe 100. So the difference between 100 and 200 is 100. So I basically have to have $100,000 cash in the business to be able to operate monthly. So that's more or less, in simple terms, what your working capital is. So you owe 100, you're owed 200. So that 100 in between you need to keep the business floating is the amount of working capital you need to run that business. So as the business expands, and let's say, as we've seen, particularly in the construction industry in the last couple of months, or
Yeah.
last couple of years, I should say, I've gone to $2.4 million worth of turnover.
Mm.
So my sales have gone to 200,000 a month. Okay, and that means now people owe me 400K, and I perhaps owe my supplier 200K on the other side of that ledger. So before I had to have $100,000 working capital. Now I need $200,000 working capital. And where does that money come from? Do I retain all my profits, but still with rapid growth, you just don't have enough to manage that working capital. So I principally work at the areas of what's called debtor and trade finance, and that is instead of you having to wait to get that 400,000, if we're working on our $2.4 million turnover business, um, I can use things like debtor finance to mean that I can have maybe 80% of that cash when I draw the invoices. That's on one side of the ledger. And there is another product that's called trade finance, which is the other side of the ledger that pays my suppliers. So within a business, they're about the two levers you've got. You've got people owing you money and money that you owe. And that's basically, in real simple terms, what a business is about.
Yeah.
And it's about managing those two issues.
Yeah. And reading the builder or the trades-based business owner that might be listening to this, reading their mind, they're going, yep, well, that all makes sense. But if I come to you and I suppose borrow money to create that working capital, I've got to pay a fee, if you like, for that money. There's costs probably to set it up. There's interest rates to maintain it. But can you help us understand why it's still a good idea based on if I don't have it, what am I missing out on? What is it costing me versus what am I gaining against the costs of getting that money so I've got that working capital? Because obviously it needs to make sense mathematically.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I suppose the term we tend to use is a thing called return on investment.
Yeah.
And without going into a detailed analysis of that, there's also a thing called opportunity cost. So, like I'm thinking I had a wholesale plumbing business I did some work with. They had a shortage in working capital. So the sort of things that would happen, they would take on large jobs and they would have a team of their guys waiting at Reece to pick up the stuff they needed to do the work. So we've got three plumbers standing around with their hands in their pocket at Reece, waiting to get a check out of accounts to pay Reece's bill because they've got too much outstanding to Reece to give them the stuff they need to go off and work.
Yeah.
And so when you start to look at, and that's an example of the sort of cost you can face because you don't have enough cash in the business, or liquidity, as we call it, enough money to make the business run. So you'll spend all your time either chasing money or paying money because you're always running on a knife edge. You don't get to concentrate on the business. You get to focus on all the jobs. You're too busy trying to scrape and steal to keep the thing afloat. So that's why you're going to have to take some costs to borrow some money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that returns there eventually.
Yeah. And this may be an unanswerable question, but it'd be good to get a bit of an example with a comparo going. For instance, if a business did need $100,000 a month working capital, and they didn't have it, and they were that plumbing business, and they were waiting for a check to be able to pay the supplier, to be able to release more materials, and they're in that sort of whirlwind merry-go-round blender food processor sort of scenario, what would you estimate that is costing the business, let's say on an annual basis, versus what is the cost for coming to you and getting that $100,000 a month working capital? Are you able to give us some sort of comparo to that?
It's a little bit hard to say what it's going to cost the business. I don't know. Let's say in that plumbing example, I would say they would waste 2 working days a month with plumbers waiting around to get materials.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So let's say, a plumber costs 1,000 a day with on costs. I'm just trying to, as a rough number, I'm missing 2. So that's 2,000 and 2 days a month. Out of the 20 working days in a month, we lose 10%. So let's call that $4K.
Yeah.
Okay. $4,000 is 4% of $100,000.
Yes.
So the cost of that is 4%.
Yeah.
If they had, something like trade or debtor finance. Debtor finance is costing, and it'll be more tomorrow, but let's say today it's costing 8 or 9% per annum. And trade finance, which is paying your suppliers, is costing 1% per annum. So let's just call it 1% per annum for simplicity on both ends.
Yes.
$4,000 cost of my plumbers as versus paying $1,000 in interest costs to have the money available. So, that's not really a rocket science calculation, that one.
No, it's a little bit of a no-brainer. But part of the reason that we love having these conversations is to start to delve into these concepts and help people understand that there's probably a better way of doing it, and we get a bit scared of some things unnecessarily. I mean, as an example, in a previous conversation, we're talking about talking with an insurance company that provides homeowners warranty, which hated throughout the industry. It's something they're required to do. Most people hate being told what to do, but when you unpack it and go, what's the purpose for it, and there is a cost for it, and how to put the cost into your expenses, it starts to make sense. And we've got to do it anyway, so you might as well do it the best way possible. So obviously what you're doing and the services and products that you can provide, they all need to be thought about as a cost of doing business, just like maintaining the ute, I would expect. Is that how you would see it and put it into the costs?
Yeah, look, you've got to service the car, and sometimes that's an expensive undertaking, but you have to, because otherwise it becomes unreliable. And I suppose, if you think, the reason why I particularly like the tool set I'm talking about is that they use the assets of the business to fund it. What happens, and business is a risky business. Business is risky. That's the reality. But when you go to your bank and ask them, and they at the moment are possibly going to lend money to you at 8% secured overdraft. Unsecured overdrafts are about 12. So we're talking about similar rate cost, except the bank took the house. They take a mortgage.
Yep.
The sort of fundings I'm talking about are basically using the assets within the business to secure the business. So I have, and I've seen it time and time again, because I've been doing this for many long years, and I've seen a couple of recessions and a GFC. People in business use their house as principal asset to borrow on to save 2-3 points a year. And from a risk return ratio, to me, that's just
crazy.
Not out there. It doesn't make sense. Why? And at the risk of getting into trouble, why risk where I keep the missus and kids? I often get in trouble using that expression, but remember, I'm an old pub guy. And the idea that we risk the family jewels, so to speak, to secure business borrowing is not necessarily wise work.
No, absolutely. It makes so much sense. Now, one of the things that we endeavour to do in these conversations is to learn a little bit more about the person. These are principles that we're talking about. They make complete sense, but it's important to understand the people that are out there providing these products and services. And I know that Scott Carson was responsible for putting us together, and he mentioned to me that he met you at a HIA breakfast, I think.
Yes.
From memory, he told me that you're an intelligent man, quote unquote.
Well, obviously he's been oversold, hasn't he?
In fact, he also mentioned to me that you're currently reading The E-Myth, which was one of my favourite books. I believe I read the first when it was called The E-Myth. Now it's called The E-Myth Revisited, and then there's E-Myth for plumbers and everything else.
Yeah.
But I'd be really fascinated as to your take. Like, you're reading the book at the moment. What grabbed your attention as far as the philosophy of that book so far?
Well, it was secondary to me because I'd
Yeah.
read it, sort of 20 years ago. Um, and I suppose one of the things that I identified, and as you go down the journey of life, you learn more lessons. And particularly, I've sort of changed career every 10 years of my life, and but for the last 15, I've worked in the specialist financial area, and this is where I've decided that I want to be because um, I'm a bit like an old-fashioned bank manager. And there used to be, like, my father would talk to me about the bank manager.
Yeah.
I remember we were running a pub, and he'd go and see the bank manager, and the bank manager said no, or the bank manager said yes.
Mm.
And back in those days, as a career in society, or as a job or a station to have in society, the bank manager was the top of the list. I think the next one under him was an army officer.
Mm.
It was considered to be a very respected, um, community caring, respected individual in the community. Now
Had
that's
conversations
changed.
with
Our
their
bank,
customers. What a concept.
yeah, exactly. And that's exactly the sort of thing I do when I go and see a customer or a potential client. I said, tell us about your business. What do you do for sales and marketing? What sort of process do you run? What are the challenges you're facing? Whereas the modern day bank manager is a voice on the phone,
Mm.
and he wants to know what your assets are and ha- show me the evidence you can pay for the loan. There used to be an ingredient in credit. We talk about uh, capacity, collateral, character,
The three C's.
and yeah, it's actually four, and I forgot what the fourth C is: capacity, collateral, character.
Cash.
Forgot my cash. Might have been cash flow. I can't remember now, but these things used to be things that loans were assessed on. It's just changed, and a bit of that's been from business point of view. There've been a lot of protections put in for consumer borrowing, and there was a time when it was very easy to borrow beyond what you could repay, and because a lot of people got into trouble in that area, the consumer legislation has protected a lot of people. But in business, every month or every, and you can use that. It doesn't work the same because in business, one month's a good month, and the next one might be a bad one.
Yeah. I might just get you to repeat that last little bit because the internet decided that it didn't want us to hear what you said, and I'd hate for us to miss out
Right.
on probably the most important point that you've made. Just in case it was, would you mind repeating it?
Okay, I was saying that borrowing
Yeah.
has changed with many of the consumer credit legislation that's brought in to protect people, particularly consumers, but it has caused a limitation in business borrowing because we people in business don't fit the nice wage
Mm.
earner type paradigm. Whereas, here's my pay slip, this is what I earn, I get paid the same every week, I get 4 weeks holiday, and it's very easy to work out whether someone can afford something alone. Whereas with self-employed people, well, last year you hardly made any profit. This year's made a lot of profit. What's it going to be next year? So it makes credit for self-employed people and people in business very hard.
What's your experience? Because we're talking a little bit about what your take on the E Myth is, and I think the essence of the book is Michael Gerber talks about the fatal assumption that most people make, that is the cause of the big majority of small business failure, is because I am good at doing this work, this type of work, I will be good at running a business that does this type of work. And he suggests that that one assumption is the cause of the big majority of small business failure. So how involved do you get with the people that you speak to in relation to, I guess, education about this? Because I think that the majority of people, a builder, for instance, they're good at building and they do the on-site stuff and they organise gear and they bang nails into wood and all that sort of stuff. And they have a propensity to want a finance guy. So they go, Martin's my man, he's my guy. And they kind of blindly trust you to just do what is necessary for their business. And unless you know that their business as intimately as they do, which probably wouldn't be hard in a lot of cases. But how much, the question is, how much do you focus on education when you're talking about financing and getting the capital to run the business and what have you, rather than just taking care of it yourself and say, I'll take care of it?
Yeah, look, I think, and you're right. There is a bit of a deep responsibility one takes in this sort of job because, particularly once you start to work with a client, and you occasionally have a few wins, you're able to take cash flow pressure off them and help them out. You've got to keep in touch with the client. It's not a do this and walk away type situation. I generally meet with most of my clients at least every 6 months, sometimes every 3 months, depending on what their growth cycle's like, because it's a changing feast. Business is shifting all the time.
Mm.
If I was talking about construction 14 months ago, let's say, we'd be talking, well, Jesus, how am I going to handle this boom? What about all the terrible shortages we're facing in steel and timber, and these sorts of issues? And I had clients that wanted to increase the liquidity and borrow more money to get more timber and steel because they wanted to be able to complete their jobs. Now what we're seeing, there's a thing in economics called the whiplash effect, which is where there's been a lot of demand for steel and timber, but if you go around building sites, you see it sitting on top of concrete slabs. It's not being used at the moment because there
Yeah.
was a shortage.
Yeah.
So some of that timber and steel has been expensive. The price is beginning to drop because demand has changed in the US. But also, the next people that are going to be hurt are suppliers to the building industry.
Yeah.
If you're a
100%.
wholesaler of timber, you work to forecast that, the last 6 months I've sold so much, I doubled my orders from my suppliers,
Mm.
and now I'm going to be sitting on a lot of stock.
And they probably
And
paid
that's
a
going
higher
to
price for it as well.
exactly. So these are the sorts of things where it is a movable feast all the time, and I tend to work closely with the client's accountant and with their internal bookkeeper or finance people. That's where I get a lot of my referral work because they get to see the problems and they give us some insight into what's going on in their business. I've got a client who lays cables and puts up power poles in new estates. And they have to buy in a lot of stock sometimes, and the job gets delayed because of weather.
Mm.
So their cash requirements shift, and there's something that you have to sort of monitor and work out what's going to be best. And from my point of view, is because you become the trusted advisor, which is the position you want and the position you earn because you've been able to reach that status. Then you take a great responsibility to help them, particularly in something like a contracting marketplace here. Like I have a commercial builder who's a client of mine as well, and this is a great example. He has looked at leveraging everything he can to increase his cash. And I said to him, I said, look, I understand you want to do this, and you're putting up more security, and we're leveraging some assets, and we've put this debtor finance position in place. Why? He said, look, I can now in this market get the best subbies in Australia to do my job. They give the best quality jobs. I get no callbacks on their work. They finish on time, and the quality's superb. You know why? Because I pay them 14 days every fortnight.
Yeah.
And they come and work for me, and their quotes are reasonable because I know they're going to be paid 14 days. And if I reliably tie up those subbies, while my competitors are out there paying them slowly, jobs are running behind, I will go through this construction crunch that's coming, or contraction, as we say in economic terms.
Mm.
And I'm going to have the right people. I'm going to finish my jobs on time. I'm going to have the best team, and I'm going to win all the new work.
Yeah.
So I'm making an investment in the future of my business.
Yeah. Yeah, which is fantastic to hear. It's probably a bit of a rarity because the majority of businesses in the building industry, I find it quite reactionary. They're totally focused on the project or projects they're doing at the moment, and they don't look too far into the future, and don't prepare for downturns, shortages, price rises, all of that sort of stuff. They sort of deal with it as it comes, which is very unfortunate. As I said, we want to learn a little bit more about you. Now, one of the reasons that I started Builders Business Black Belt, it seems that I am driven by a need to help people when they are suffering from unnecessary pain. And there's a lot of it in the building industry. So I kind of ended up being drawn to that because the majority of the pain that people will experience in the building industry is of their own doing, lack of systems and preparedness and all of that sort of stuff. What is it that drove you into this space? Like you said, you were changing every 10 years and you've stayed in this space. What is it that has drawn you to it and keeps you in it?
Okay, I suppose it's the challenges that it brings up because I work across many different industries. So I have a lot of people recently in the IT industry. And from my perspective, being the old-fashioned bank manager I mentioned earlier, I get to look and see how different businesses run and learn new and exciting things all the time because it's a challenge to look at the way different businesses are working. I've got a few startup businesses I'm working with that are trying new things to do and getting stuff manufactured overseas and bringing it here, but using their design and IP in it. Those sorts of things there's lots of variance and change that you get to see. And like you said, it's that helping situation because you're a bit objective. You come into things, and particularly I see in construction and with the subbies, the wife's looking after the kids and doing the books late at night. She's saying, we haven't got these payments, what's going on? And particularly tends to be the chief worrier, whereas hubby goes out and he just keeps working harder and harder. 10 o'clock at night, he's putting in PowerPoints, thinking that it's going to fix everything if I just work harder. Whereas some better financial management, some correct funding takes all that pressure off people. And, when I've seen transactions settle, and you just see a gentle smile break up across people's face because they know that pressure has come off their shoulders. Yeah. And having seen people fail and the trauma of, like having a business, and it's a terrible parallel, but, having a business fail is a bit like getting cancer, if you get what I mean. It's a all-consuming thing. I know they're very different, but when you look at people that have had the problem, it could have been either one because of the wear and tear and stress it puts upon them.
I'd like to know your thoughts and how you deal with, I suppose, the mindset. And I think this is really important to us, or to me in Builders Business Black Belt. We do a lot of work to create environments and resources to contribute to better outcomes as far as mental health is concerned. And as I said at the start of the show, financial stress is probably the worst stress because it seems to amplify any other situation you might be dealing with. If you haven't got the financial stress, some problems just disappear completely, like they're just not there anymore. But when you've got financial stress, it seems to compound the effect. And it's easy for people to get into financial trouble. You've got the old hardly normal, buy the 86-inch TV now and you've got 5 years to pay. But it's probably stuffed by the time you own it, and you just never seem to get ahead. You go behind, and you see these ads on TV that just annoy the crap out of me. Wallet Wizard. If you've got a problem, you go and you get the payday finance thing, and it just puts people in an ever decreasing cycle, and they have less and less control over their financial situation. What are the things that you do to make sure that people understand what they're getting into? And this is different. Like this is finance to be able to help you manage the business more effectively, save you money, which you very rarely hear, and make things better. But just throwing money at the problem doesn't fix it. Like Wallet Wizard doesn't fix it. But your approach will fix problems as long as the people have the right mindset and approach to it. So can you help us understand some of the things that you talk about and help people so they don't get into that hardly normal Wallet Wizard mentality downward spiral?
Exactly. Well, I suppose some of the things I talk about, and you have to be a little bit cautious about how you talk to customers, because I don't necessarily like hearing all the hard news. But take, for example, what I see is a lot of small businesses go out and take on very expensive cash flow loans. And because I don't want to be sued, I won't mention who those lenders are, but some of them become household names now. These are not the banks. These are the fintechs. And, they're talking like costs of 2 points a month. 24% is their credit card rates. Now, many people in business take these on because they're quick, simple, and easy. Put an application online. I can do it. They'll give me the money in 24, 48 hours. Hello, here we go again. And it's very much like that wallet loan. It's very much like for a payee earner taking a pay advance, because what happens, the interest is so expensive. And you're halfway through paying it down, and then you need some more. So you get on this ever-rotating sort of treadmill of consistently borrowing. And because they're very expensive, they eventually catch up with you. So whereas the sort of tools I tend to use, and I was talking about that debtor and trade finance, for example, debtor finance, you were owed $200,000. We use that example. Now, I've just brought that forward. So, but it's a one-trick pony. Okay? I can take the money you were owed and give it to you day one, but I can only do that once. So now you have to think about how, now you've got that working capital problem addressed, you've got that additional cash in the business, how are you going to spend it and use it? Because it gives you a great opportunity, particularly in times like this. If you have some liquidity, like the example I gave about the guy who's getting his subcontractors 14 days, you have the ability, when everybody else is pulling in their horns and wanting to close up shop, if you've got liquidity, you can buy your competitor. So you've got I often call it, what's fancy name is counter-cyclical thinking, or don't be a sheep. So when everybody's saying it's, that's the easy way I call it. But when everybody is tightening up and getting conservative, if you want to, all the great fortunes are made in tough times. And so if you've got the courage and the conviction and you're able to back yourself with the right funding, you can look at actually seeing not where I'm going to be in a year from now, but 3 years from now, I'll be 3 or 4 times as big as I am now. I'll have less competitors because the market will have cleaned them out. But it's a gutsy call. It's not easy to make that decision.
You need to make sure that you've got a good, stable business model in the first place.
And mindset.
That. 100%, which is all part of it. Because one of the things that we talk about in Black Belt is if you try to scale up something that is fundamentally flawed, a model that's fundamentally flawed, and you've got 4 problems now, and then you double your business, you won't have 8 problems, you'll probably have 16 problems. Like the problems scale if your business model is fundamentally flawed, which most trades-based businesses are. They have a fundamental flaw in their business model. So we have to fix that before you start growing and so forth. So I always, I've got a couple of questions. They are nothing to do with business, and they're a little bit left field to learn a little bit about Martin, a little bit more about you and what you like and what you don't. So the first question is, we just talked about you being drawn and driven and you're in this industry for the long haul, which is exciting and great to hear about. But if you weren't doing this, what other occupation would you absolutely love to do?
Well, I suppose it's hard work, but I really enjoy the hospitality industry. And maybe it's because it's where my roots are. And like I said, working in a public bar from 14, but there is nothing like the 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 character and the repa and the public bar banter, for want of better terms, that still exists out there. I'm involved with the RSL, which is one of the last bastions of those sorts of public bar banter, and the classic those conversations. The thing I always think of is someone will be saying this, and the bloke next to him saying, "What would you know?" The classic Australian putting each other down, and before the internet, if if you're in that sort of bar type situation, uh, oh look, I'm having trouble with my car. Back then it used to be the carby, or now we'd say your fuel injectors and whatever. Oh, go and see Phil. Tell him I sent you. He fixed my car last week. He's a guru at that problem.
Yeah.
And there used to be that, what I call that public bar knowledge
Mm.
that you can find out, and it's a great social environment, and it's still around a bit, and it's not so much about the amount of alcohol you drink, although that can be a little bit of a problem, but it's about the fellowship and camaraderie, I suppose, that you get in that hospitality type environment, and the ability to put each other down. Like that classic statement of "What would you know?" Or how you can counter each other on your various football teams' performance
Yeah.
and those sorts of things. It's a great Australian tradition that I like.
Yeah. And I get a sense that that's kind of how you run this business as well. You kind of maybe put people together. If somebody has something that they can help with somebody else, I'm sure you put them together. So I think it's really important to have that approach, particularly in a business like yours, where I'll get your thoughts on it. How important is building relationships in your business to the success of your business and the ability to genuinely help your clients? How important is the relationship and building it?
Oh, look, it's the most important thing, and I often don't start with the client because a lot of my work, because of the specialist area I do, it comes from accountants and bookkeepers and business advisors, um, and I have to build relationships with them first before they introduce me to their clients. But after you've been doing it a while, and you give examples of what you've been able to do for certain clients, and these are done once again, not necessarily at a bar. I host a lunch once a month where I invite various people. We don't talk shop because people deal with people they know, like, and trust.
Yeah.
So you basically, you might have had lunch with a guy 3 times in the year, and all of a sudden the fourth time he says, "Oh, look, I would like you to come and help me with this particular client. I think you've got the expertise." Um, and that's better than any advertising or any other work you can do, because you go in there as a recommended partner of someone they know and trust, and it means that you can expedite things and get things to happen quickly because you know what's going on in the business.
Yeah. Yeah. Great
But
answer.
that brings us back. It brings us back to that myth that I didn't quite cover off on,
Yep.
because it's about being a technician. But I put an article on LinkedIn not so long ago saying that there's an additional discipline you need in business now, and that's a financial discipline. You see, the E-Myth talks about, look, I'm a great pie baker and I can bake so many pies and my pies taste wonderful and I can sell my pies. Because people like me, I'm a likable personality and I stand there at the counter and I bake them and I sell the pies. But they're all good disciplines. The E-Myth talks about the discipline of sales, the technician, the production, but it doesn't talk about what I call the fourth one, which is the numbers or financial discipline to understand, hey, it's about money. And some time ago when it was just baking pies, things were a lot easier. But now the pace of change, how quickly money flows through the system, um, we used to write checks to pay for things, and that would mean that the check wasn't drawn for 5 days.
Mm.
Now we do it via EFT and it's instant. We change those sort of cash cycles up. So we need a different level of expertise and understanding of the accounting and financial side is what many small business people don't have, particularly in construction, and they're reluctant to have someone come and tell them how it's done. And it's not tell them how it's done. Advice is very hard to give, particularly an example. I did some work on a project with a colleague of mine that we called the Construction Gateway. And that was about teaching tradies and people in the trade related areas how to run their business better. And so to launch this, we had quite a few partners to launch, and we were putting on free beer at the pub. Come to the launch.
Must have been a big crowd if you had free beer.
No, that's the thing. It wasn't a big crowd and I worked on this for about 6 months. I thought, why isn't this working? And then a really smart guy from an advertising agency was sitting down with us and he said, do you know why it's not working? No, I'm completely. He said, no, it's not to do with the free. He said, they don't want to learn.
Right.
He said, the average trade guy became a trade person, so he didn't have to go to university or whatever. He likes to be practical, right? And he would rather miss out on his free beer and be sitting there working to 10 o'clock at night, fixing PowerPoints or putting in a plumbing installation, whatever it is, than get in what he sees as the classroom again. So it's not, they don't like learning. So to educate them, you've got to use an osmosis thing, like someone, while they're having lunch on site, talking about what they're doing is going to be 10 times as valuable as you sitting at the top of a pub, even handing them a free beer and saying, this is what you need to do. So I found that a really interesting lesson because it's a reluctance to learn. And that's perhaps the biggest disadvantage they face. Not flawed business models or whatever. It's a not really wanting to learn and to understand. And when you get smart people in the construction and trades thing that they want to learn and you can tell by their eyes, tell me more. You can say this one's going to be a winner, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because they're prepared to listen and learn. And you must find that out from the coaching side and helping people as well.
Yeah, I find that I feel blessed that we have such an incredible group of builders in the Builders Business Black Belt group, and we've got another program called Blueprint, which is kind of the entry to that. And there's a lot of amazing people in there that make it a pleasure to work with them. I know there's a couple of listening now. I'll say most of the time. It's a pleasure to work with them most of the time, but when I say most, it's sort of 95% of the time. So yeah, the challenge in the whole industry is that if you sit there and you blame external circumstances, it's the government, it's the economy, it's the supply chain, it's the this, it's the that, it's the other, and you're forever sort of blaming everything out there instead of looking at your own, as you say, openness and willingness to learn skills, communication, systems, processes, get good people in your corner. Like we're always trying to gather people into the tool shed, people like yourself. That's why we want to learn about you rather than, so much about your business, because people need to get to know people so they can go on and feel comfortable taking on the advice and the direction to help them. We're all here to help them grow a better business, but there has to be that level of trust. And I think getting to know people is super important. So just before we get out of here, what are the next steps? So if someone has been listening to this and go, I am a little bit skinny, I'm forever, robbing Peter to pay Paul or what have you, and I might need to get my act together, and it would be worthwhile having a chat with Martin. What's the process and what are the steps?
Look, the easiest thing is to give me a call. I'm a guy who picks up his phone all the time, and I have a simple mobile number, 0407 477 555, which is easy to remember. Or if you just look up Finance for Business on the web, it's easy to get hold of me. And I think one thing, as we're running out of time, that I haven't mentioned yet, that is important with these particular tools, is that one of the things I spoke about earlier was Bill will be all right, he'll pay me eventually, and those sorts of practices. Some of the big building companies are falling over, and I've got one client that lost $600K to ProBuild. Fortunately, that debt was insured, and people don't realise that using something like the debtor funding I'm talking about, of bringing your invoices forward, you can have those insured as part of that process. Now, and because the lender insures them to cover their bum, not yours, but that means 80% of the debt's insured because the guy who was dealing with ProBuild, now admittedly it took 11 weeks till he got it, but he was owed 600 and he got $498,000 back. Now, that's still $100 cut, $100K cut, but to have that money back, how many times do we see small businesses that say, what happened? My major customer went broke, and it all comes off the bottom line, and they're basically stuffed. So one of the things to look at is, and if you've got a lender that's lending against your debtors, in other words, the people you're lending your money to, because that's what they are, if they don't pay you up front, they credit check them. And they say, this one will insure, this one we won't. Now, when they say, we can't get insurance on this guy, you've got to say, hey, do I want to work for it? And that can be, that's an easy thing to let people manage what we call trade credit risk. Because the trade credit, it's unbelievable, but in Australia's small and medium business, we're currently, in a year, businesses lend $1.3 trillion on trade credit. That's now that, and $1 trillion is a million. It's a real big number. And that's the amount of money that businesses are lending to each other's. So, if you're a business, you've got a supplier. The supplier is he's lending you X, and you have to lend to your clients Y on the other side. But everybody's lending everybody money. So business is all about lending money to each other. It's what makes the world go round, but there are risks associated, and there's some things you can do to sort of shore up those risks.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that point up, because that does happen. We've seen it happen a few times, and unfortunately, sometimes it's the last straw. So to be able to have that sort of protection would be a good thing if it's something that you can make happen. So I just want to thank you so much for being so generous with both your time and your knowledge, and coming in and having a conversation with us on the Tool Shed. And I'm sure we'll be talking to you again at some stage in the future.
I'd love to. It's been a great experience. As I sent you some bits and pieces, and I hadn't done one of these before, but this is a great relaxed environment. It's a bit like sitting down the pub having a chat, except I haven't got a beer.
Well, you could have had one. It didn't say it was a dry argument, so I don't have a trouble if someone wants to have a beer or a Chardonnay while we're having a talk, unless it's like maybe 11 in the morning, but this is in the afternoon, so that's just fine.
Yeah. But I suppose as far as contacting me, I'm happy to have a chat, and I do lots. Most of the work I do when someone has a chat with me is no obligation.
Yeah, perfect.
Ring up and say, I've got this sort of problem. Well, you could do this and this. Try that first. Like I had a bookkeeper who had some economic issues, and she had a couple of loans. I said, well, do this, this, and this, and let me know how you go. If you get stuck, give me a call. If not, try that and see if it works. Because you don't, it's not, intervention is not necessarily the greatest thing unless it's necessary. Give people some advice, because if you give that kind of advice, 12 months from now, that person will be coming back to talk about something that's more something I can help with.
Yeah.
So it's always easy to give that advice, and it pays back in spades over time.
Yeah. So it comes back to the relationships, folks. So thank you very much, Martin, for being on the show. So Martin's website is Fin4Biz. So it's FINFORBIZ. So fin4biz.com.au, and his phone number again is 0407 477 555 is the phone number that you can reach out to Martin. So it's been a fantastic conversation. I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. It's been a lot of things that you can think about, how you can protect yourself, how you can make business a little more, I suppose, simple, as far as getting rid of the highs and the lows and giving yourself a bit more confidence to be able to grow in the manner that you want. So it's been a great conversation. We'll be back again in the not too distant future, next week, in fact, with another Toolshed podcast. So I'm Mick Hawes from Builders Business Black Belt. That is it. We'll see you next time.